too many people give up too soon. If you're not there, if you're not putting yourself in the position, if you're not waking up every single day, executing on that same vision and mission that you believe is what separates you from the rest of the world, you're not going to be there when that lucky moment comes. So true wealth is about taking risk, and it's about concentration to that. And when you can put those things together, that's what puts you on the path to success.
You have to hang in the game long enough.
That's it.
To get lucky.
That's so true, Jeff. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I talk to young people, quite a bit, and they're trying to see, well, what are some of the things that you did, especially young advisors. I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's consistency for a few reasons. I mean, number one, mastery, expertise takes time, right? I mean, I tell people the first 10 years, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was making so many mistakes, but it's really just like you with the restaurant experience. It's from those mistakes, and that experience is really what builds that expertise. You can only learn so much in school, so much in the boardroom, but when you get out there and you start to execute and you make those mistakes and you do them in different scenarios, that's really where you start to provide value to your clients. Also, let's look, we talked about my industry, but a lot of industries are the same. When you first start out, it's hard. There's a big failure rate in my industry. Within 2 to 3 years, a lot of brokers leave the game. There's a story I tell, I hate to tell it, so I still talk to the guy these days, but we were both in the same trainee class out of Arizona State at Waterhouse in the 90s. And, he left after 4 years. And just, couldn't cut it, didn't want to wash the cars on the weekend. He was too big for that type of thing. And the guy, I think today, maybe he's lucky to make $75,000, $80,000 a year. I think he's working for FedEx because he was always trying to find that next great thing. And now he's in his 40s and he's realizing he's regretful. I should have just stuck with it. And so I think too many people give up too soon. And as long as you're running the right playbook, you've got to run a lot of plays time and time again. But to your point, like, look, luck, I say luck, and I say that a bit facetiously. If you're not there, if you're not putting yourself in the position, if you're not waking up every single day, executing on that same vision and mission that you believe is what separates you from the rest of the world, you're not going to be there when that lucky moment comes. So unless I was grinding it out one client at a time, showing up every day, working 15, 16-hour days, that attorney never would have referred Levi to me. I never would have kept him as a client, and it never really would have blown up to what it was. And like I said, I know a lot about very little. I never took my eye off the ball. I think a lot of advisors they're trying to dabble in way too many things, or if they just spent that extra time focusing on, and I think this is any industry, really honing their craft, being the best they could be within that, I think that would have been a lot better served than trying to diversify. And I get the risk mitigation strategy of that, but to be great in anything, I think to build true wealth, you really have to focus on one expertise.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Diversification is a way to mitigate risk, but also being excellent at what you do is a good way to mitigate risk too.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, you look at Warren Buffett, it's funny when you talk about diversification in a sense of, managing your investments. He tells a lot of people a lot of times, well, go out and invest in the S&P 500 fund, diversify your assets. He said that time and time again. But when you look at his quarterly report, 70% of his assets are in 6 different companies.
Right.
And I could tell you somebody who is very against what our industry believes. The most money I've personally made, the most money my clients have made have been by taking risk, asset concentration. Our key portfolio never has more than 20 stocks in it. A lot of people will tell you that's crazy. There's a lot of young people who want to invest in stocks that I tell them, do not do that. Invest in yourself, start a business, try that until your early 30s. If that doesn't work out by the time you're 35, maybe go get a job and fill out your 401k. But true wealth is about taking risk, and it's about concentration, not diversification.
I'm so glad you said that. It's so funny. I have been thinking about this a lot lately. I have a group of teens. I have 2 teenage boys, 18-year-old and 17-year-old, and they have a lot of friends. They're always around the house. And I'm like the entrepreneurial dad that I don't have a job. My license plate of my car is unemployed. That's literally the word unemployed is my license plate. So it's kind of like, I'm like the cool dad that they like to talk to about money and stuff because I don't have to go to work every day. Like a lot of their dads, right? So they're always asking me, they're like, hey, should I open up a Robinhood account, or should I get, and buy some Tesla shares, or should I? And I'm like, and they're like getting their paycheck from like the car wash or, Long John Silver's or whatever. It's like $175 paycheck that they're going to live off 150 of it. And they got 25 extra dollars. And they're like, hey, should I go buy like a fraction of a Tesla share? I'm like, what you just said, it's like, no, like figure out a way to invest in yourself. Like you're not going to, this American, I think it's a very American, old fashioned psychology of like little sprinkles of savings will ultimately lead you to wealth. Like none of us are going to live that long in this world.
No, that's true. And I think, to your point, Jeff, I mean, our country is not really built for entrepreneurism, right? It's built to go to school, get a job, save in your 401k, retire with a couple of $1,000,000 and live off $100,000 a year in your retirement. That's really what it's set up to do. And so that's the challenge for younger people. It's great to have people like you who are professing entrepreneurism because number one, I mean, the jobs of yesterday, the GMs and the Fords, where you come out of high school, work on the assembly line and you get a pension are over. Nobody's delivering pensions anymore. So you're responsible for that for yourself. But the ability to be an entrepreneur today with social media, global outreach, outsourcing, it's easier than ever to do before. And I see these young people locking them in themselves into dead-end jobs and not taking that risk when they really do have value that they can offer that is going to give them the financial freedom and ability to be rewarded from that. They shouldn't be investing in stocks in their 20s. They should be investing in themselves first and foremost, trying to start a business. Because, like I said, look, I just talked about a portfolio where we've done 20-something% annualized for the last few years. But if you got 50 grand to invest or 20 grand, like what does that really mean? And so all of my clients, as someone who works with very, very wealthy people, none of them got wealthy from investing. That's how they grew their wealth,
exactly.
Right? But 90% of them made it as entrepreneurs or professional athletes. And most people are not going to be professional athletes.
Right.
So that leaves the secondary option of being an entrepreneur. That's where you make money. And how that happens, like Jeff, is you make that first couple $100,000, few $100,000, then you're living off of that. The next 200,000-300,000, you're then putting that away. And when you're continually putting 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 into the market, compounding at 8 or 9%, that's how you start to build wealth. It's not from a one-time investment in Tesla that's going to get you there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Like you're so just preaching the gospel here that I sometimes feel like a voice in the wilderness, right? Like, because we have such a big monolithic opponent, which is old fashioned American dream psychology of school, debt, job, pension, retirement. And, in the world we live in, I mean, you probably know all this data, the average raise every year is, I forget the stat, like 1.8%, and inflation is 3%.
Right.
So they give you a raise that doesn't even keep up with the increase in the cost of a gallon of milk.
Right.
And, you've got the average person, is still paying off student debt into their late 40s. Yeah. You're in your 40s. We're both in our 40s, functionally retired. And most people they haven't even paid off their college education by the time they're our age.
Right. Exactly.
And this, it's so true. And you even talked about, first of all, making 20-25% a year, you have to hire a guy like Rob Luna to manage your money to make 20 or 25% a year consistently. But what was your minimum account in your firm?
Yeah, the minimum account at my firm right now is $1 million. I'm typically working with clients over $5 million investable. Right. So clients about 20 million.
So my point is, the guy that's got 50 grand saved up that walks into the Merrill Lynch or the Edward Jones office and says, "Hey, I want to open. Can somebody help me with this?" Whoever's in that office, they're not going to get you 25% a year predictably without taking a ton of risk. Like their charter is not even going to allow for that. So you got to have a lot of money before you even get access to those returns. Some of those things that can provide those returns, you have to be accredited to even go into, right? Exactly. So the guy, I think there's a massive fallacy in this country and in probably the world around this idea of like, okay, I got my 50 grand in savings. Let me invest it to get rich.
Yeah.
It is that is a disastrous strategy. And that's, nobody wants to hear that, because it sounds to a lot of people that are locked into mainstream, ways of being and doing in the world. It's like, well, how am I ever supposed to accumulate a few $100,000 excess by the time I'm, in the next 5 or 10 years, right? And to me, the answer is you have to start a business.
It's the only way. I mean, it's funny because we never really spoke before, but I started a wealth academy this year where I teach people finance and entrepreneurism. And really the reason is I teach them hand in hand is because most of the people in my academy are millennials, just like myself, who no one's going to give them a big check to start anything. They don't have a leg up in life. And like I tell them, if you want to get wealthy, the only way I know how to do it, unless you're wealthy already, is to start a business. And I say this as someone, well, yeah, I work with professional athletes, but 80% of my clients are entrepreneurs. And I tell you, probably, I don't know exactly, but half of them or just, high school education. I've got a client who started a pest control business out of his business, who probably nets free cash flow $2.5–3 million a year right now, right? This is a guy, I think he had a 10th grade education. He dropped out of high school. It's really not that hard, but just like we talked about, he started it, he took a risk, he made some investment in the supplies, he hired his second guy, third guy, fourth guy, took care of his customers, got referrals, and over 20 years, he was able to build that business, acquired a couple of small ones. It's really not that difficult to do it. But like we said, our educational system does not teach that. Our parents don't really teach us that. So, hopefully a new generation, as we're parents, we're teaching our kids a little bit different. You'll start to see that change. But yeah, I can't stress enough. I mean, the only way I could tell you how you are going to create wealth if you're not wealthy already is to start a business.
Did you always know that you wanted to manage money for other people, or did you set out to do something different initially?
No, man, I had zero idea. I mean, some people know my background story. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but grew up extremely poor. I didn't even really know what a stock was at that time. Grew up in inner city Los Angeles, a lot of gang violence at that time. Lost a lot of friends, my brother to that, unfortunately. I was a pretty good wrestler though, and that's kind of what got me out of things. Got a scholarship to go wrestle in college. And, kind of lo and behold, it was just one of these things where my sophomore year in college, this is back, I want to date myself, in the 90s, where we still used to look in the newspaper for ads. And I saw this big thing that said stockbroker trainee, Waterhouse hiring. And I said, look, that sounds like it's an opportunity. I was 20 years old, became a stockbroker trainee in 1990, whatever it was. And just knew that was really my one opportunity I think I was going to get in life, and just went full bore all into it to be the best that I could, and just stuck with it. I'm, in my mid 40s now, and it's all I've ever done. And it wound up working out okay for me.
Cool. So you, like my dad, you started as a broker.
Yeah.
And obviously, I assume built up enough rapport and credibility and confidence with some of your brokerage clients that at some point they just directly entrusted you with some money to manage. Is that kind of how it happened?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I was 26 years old when I started my own firm. Like you said, out of my bedroom, literally, I took 2 clients from the firm that I was working with, took a huge pay cut from where I was at, and just took a lot of risk before, I really knew what risk was. Didn't have any children at the time. And yeah, I just had a couple of people essentially that believed in me, and just made sure I did a really good job from them. And kind of the story ticked on afterwards, one client at a time, built up to almost $1 billion in assets, which you hear a lot of people managing $1 billion portfolios in real estate. That's one thing, because that's the non-leverage. But when you actually have people giving you that much money, it's pretty difficult to do on your own. But we were able to do that.
Yeah, that's a huge distinction. Yeah, people have $1 billion real estate portfolio that they might have been able to grow into off of $50 million in principal that's leveraged and raised. But if you have $1 billion in assets under management in a wealth management company, that means people literally gave you $1 billion.
Exactly.
Like you're not, and generally, I mean, you're not probably trading on margin. Like they're not asking you to leverage that. They want you to not leverage that in many cases, right? So
yeah, no, this is people's serious money. So when you're managing that much money, also for high net worth individuals, their net worth is well beyond that. So that's assets under management. There's something called assets under advisement. When we're advising on their real estate portfolios, fine wine collections, automobile collections. So, sometimes the net worth of that billion valuation could be, $5 billion, $10 billion normally. That's just the money that they're giving you to manage.
Yeah. This is, man, this is so cool. So close to home. I know my dad's world's same kind of deal, high net worth individuals. I think they're, when he started, their minimum account was $1 million. I think now it's either 2 or 5 or, something. And it's that same deal. You're talking wealthy people that give you usually a percentage of their liquid assets, not all of them. They usually have multiple firms, and you're just paid to perform.
That's exactly it.
So let's go back then. So you're 26 years old. You have two accounts that you found your firm with. Do you mind if I ask what the size of those accounts was?
Oh, they weren't big. I think one was about $1 million and one was $1.5 million. So if you think about that, that's 2.5 million at 1%. That's about 25 grand in revenue that I was starting out with.
That's exactly what I wanted to get at is, usually these firms have a tiered commission structure. I don't know if you call it commissions, but basically you get paid a percentage of the assets. And it typically starts at 1% for the smaller accounts, and it'll go as low as maybe 1/4%.
Yeah, 1/4% if you're, up over 25 million, something like that.
So that's why I was asking, because my guess was you weren't making a lot of money when you took this leap.
No, that's what I said. When I quit the job, I had to think of base salary, which, wasn't at the time, but I was in my early 20s, huge, but 75 grand plus some compensation. So I was making in my early 20s about 140, 150,000. So to leave in the first year, make 25 grand, it wasn't easy. The truth of the matter was, we talk about entrepreneurs and taking risks. Look, I had a college degree. I was making 100 and something grand in my 20s, which wasn't bad at the time. There's some things you had to do to get by. I had a friend who actually had an auto detail business. So I was, working my ass off during the week, and then Saturdays and Sundays, I was actually helping him detail cars for cash. And that's kind of how I kept the lights on and paid the bills during that time. And so I was able to build that book up some more.
And where were you living at the time? In LA?
I was living in Arizona. I did my undergrad at Arizona State. So I started the business out of Scottsdale, Arizona.
Oh, that's cool. I'm actually going to Scottsdale in 2 weeks. Taking my wife and my son and his girlfriend down to a concert in Phoenix, and we're staying in Scottsdale. And I will report, because I'm renting an Airbnb down there, Scottsdale's not an inexpensive place to live.
No, especially not anymore. But but that being said, I just came back from Aspen, and looked like the average home over there is about 13 million. So it just seems like wherever you go now, price is skyrocketing.
Yeah, it is. But my point being, so you're living off $2 grand a month, and the thing with that is you've got 2 accounts. It's not like you have 30 accounts, and so okay, if I lose one, no, like you have so one guy with $1 million who goes, okay, Rob, take your shot. And if you fumble that, they're going to pull the account, and now your income is going to go from $25,000 a year to $15,000 a year. Like, you basically only had one shot. So tell me about that year. Like, obviously you made it work, but I mean, you were scrimping, you were detailing cars on weekends, but obviously you did a good job for them and started to build up some performance. Like, walk me through that year.
Yeah, no, it was extremely stressful, starting out, because like you said, you got 2 clients. One of the things about the wealth management space in terms of client retention is, as you probably know, Jeff, like, there's no long-term contracts, right? Daily renewable contracts. So these guys can fire you at any time, let alone we build a quarter in advance. So if they fired me, I might actually have to give them a refund to walk out the door. And I didn't have, my coffers full at that time. So, it was extremely stressful, but it was, back in that days, it was real about guerrilla marketing. And for myself, it was finding one CPA who was my 3rd client, who was out of New York, about 10 years older than me, who actually moved out to Scottsdale and said, hey, look, that's kind of the bread and butter of financial advisors, are estate planning attorneys, CPAs. Those are the people that they're really, the clients are going to get referrals from. So I started networking with a CPA, and this guy told me, he said, look, I'm not going to let you test out money on my clients, but I'll give you my family's money to manage it for a year. If you do a good job, I'll refer clients to you. And really, quite honestly, that's what it was, Jeff. I spent, they tell you as financial advisors, a lot of times, don't spend your time in front of the screen, spend it out on the golf course. But I did the opposite. I was really a student of the game. I was, calling any CEO that would talk to me, which weren't a lot at the time. Even things in terms of, I was paying for at the time topographic maps in terms of retail stores like Costco to see at the time was, that's what we would look and see, is there more cars in the parking lot this quarter to see if their sales were going to tick up. I was spending a lot of that money really in research. And thankfully, I was really able to deliver some really good performance over the first couple of years. That, along with a very highly customized customer service, they were calling me whenever they wanted. They have my cell phone number, and between those two things, it just kind of spiraled on into referrals. And there's really a lot of good referrals that helped me kind of get up to that next level.
So you grew from 2.5 million in assets under management in 2002 when you started to almost $1 billion in 18 years.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a long time, right?
Yeah.
But I did that without any M&A. That was all organic growth. So when you're doing it that way, I mean, it takes a little bit longer, but it's a lot of people that trust you. And it's a lot of mistakes that you can't make. And when you think about that time, I started the business in 2002. Look, 2008, 2009 was the worst financial crisis we've seen, in our country's history since the Great Depression. My daughter was born in the middle of 2008 during all this. And when you talk about your income, right, there wasn't anybody, unless they're lying to you, that didn't get hit in 2008, 2009. So, we saw our income drop 30-35%. At the same time, I'm having a daughter. It was some very, very sleepless nights in that period of time. But it was really kind of that conviction and just, staying the course, not wavering, over communicating with clients during that time. A lot of people panicked and sold out. And what they don't remember is, the bottom of March of 2009, the market rallied about 65% in just a matter of 12 weeks. And so a lot of people that were out on the sidelines never really got that. So we were able to get that all back very quickly. But it was a scary time to be in business as a wealth manager, because there's no guaranteed salaries.
I have to show you something. I keep this in my office. It used to be on the wall, but I put it on the floor as a memento, as a reminder of how life can be. This is my tax return from 2008.
What's that AGI there?
I had a negative $40,000 tax return in 2008. So
yep. So it's a good reminder to have. I think a lot of people had a similar return that year.
Yeah, it was. And actually, I think the losses, I don't remember how I took all the losses, but yeah, I opened a couple of franchise restaurants, and I was like, I think I'm a few years younger than you. I was, in 2006, when I opened the restaurants, I was 27 years old, and I was a jazz piano player. I had but the banks would loan anybody money at that time, right? So they loaned this, freelance jazz musician, $400,000 to open a pair of franchise restaurants. And I opened this restaurant right at the beginning of 2007, and, great timing. I was out of business a year later, and that was, I was able to take some of the losses on my tax return. But anyway, yeah, but that was a rough time. But yeah, and a lot of people don't really understand that. In fact, you know what? And again, I never know where these conversations are going to go. My audience is used to me bouncing all over the place, but yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about, I'm just going to run with this thread in the wealth management industry. Like you talked about recovering 65%, and there's this game in wealth management. I call it a game, but it's just statistics, right? Where, you go up, like it basically, if you drop 50%, you have to go up 100%. Yeah. Just to get back to even, right? So people talk about aggregate returns, compounding returns. I wonder if you could talk about from 2002 to 2020. First of all, do you know what your average rate of return was, your performance?
Yeah. So what we run is we run separately managed accounts. We didn't really start running models until about 3 to 4 years ago, meaning that everybody has different management strategies and styles. And so the way you have to report performance has to be on an aggregate of a similar strategy. So we started doing that about 3 years ago, and our strategy, our adaptive alpha strategy, since that time has done about 25% annualized, but it's been a good few years. I would say in general, if I had to estimate the aggregate group of our clients, it was probably somewhere in about the 8% rate of return during that period of time. Net
okay. 8%. Okay, cool. So, rule of 72, that means your portfolio organically doubled every 9 years.
Yeah.
So you probably had 2 rounds of doubling.
Exactly.
But So that means you were so most of your growth didn't come from doubling. It came in from hardcore bringing in new clients.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely new clients. I think one of the things that really helped me was, probably about 7 years into the business, I got an opportunity to work with my first professional athlete. It's all public. His name is Levi Brown. He played. I was out there in Arizona at the time. He signed. He was 4th or 5th overall, first round draft pick for the Cardinals, 2008. Signed a $62 million contract, with the time was the largest for an NFL player. And, it was funny because he was interviewing Merrill Lynch at the time, Morgan Stanley, all the obvious players. I think I was managing maybe, I don't know, about 175 million at the time. And for someone who's looking to invest 40 or $50 million, that's a big risk for them to take. But, what was interesting, Jeff, is the reason I think, and he'll tell the story today, why he hired me, is everybody else was basically telling him what he wanted to hear. Yeah, we're going to do this for you. Oh, yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do that. And Levi, like myself, grew up from very humble beginnings. And when I got that referral, he was from an estate planning attorney. I didn't know who he was. I'm not a big football fan. So I kind of Googled it. And the first thing that came up to me was an Sports Illustrated article that talked about basically 70% of NFL players being bankrupt within 2 years of leading the league. And even though I wasn't, doing great at the time, I was starting to do pretty good. And I was really worried about what would the reputational damage be? Because this is an industry that's built off of credibility and trust in your reputation. And so I told him from day one, look, I'll work with you, but you're going to stick on a budget. Here's the things that you're going to do, A, B, C, and D. And if you don't, we can part as friends, but we're definitely going to part. And that's really what brought him in. It was my biggest, obviously, account at the time. And, that brought some good press with Sports Illustrated. We got an article in the New York Times that actually got me on the television at that time about 11 or 12 years ago. And that's really what kind of, a lot of times, and I spent so many times with great entrepreneurs who sold businesses for hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, to where every single person is going to tell you it comes down to just a little bit of luck. And that was kind of my lucky moment of him coming in and giving me that opportunity as a client, who I'm still working with him today, 13, 14 years later. That really, I think, is the one key factor that kicked me into that next level.
Yeah. I agree with you about luck, call it luck. I for example, I interviewed a guy yesterday who had a concierge business that does like ridiculously extravagant, almost like he said it's basically the Make-A-Wish Foundation for people with $1 billion checkbook.
People,
right? Yeah. He'll like take you scuba diving around the wreckage of the Titanic, or you can have dinner at the top of the Eiffel Tower with Emeril Lagasse cooking the food, or like whatever you want, right? He pulls it off, and I don't remember the exact details of the story, but basically he was doing his grind, and he had this big vision. And he ran the play over and over and over, but it didn't click. And then one time, all of a sudden, right place, right time, it clicked. So and he would say, yeah, lucky, right place, right time. But you have to hang in the game long enough.
That's it.
To get lucky. Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you can get a free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut, which shows you the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy. There's a special link just for this episode in the description. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. There are some jobs you can go get where it's like, yeah, you know what? Just keep your job. You'll get rich. Like if you're, if you come out of Wharton at 25 years old and get hired directly into Goldman Sachs and you're willing to put in the hours, great. Do that for 20 years. You'll be filthy rich, right?
Right.
That's a super small percentage of jobs.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is the annual income threshold? And I've never asked this question before, so I'm making it up on the fly here. But what would you say is the annual income threshold below which you're naive if you think that just sticking with your day job is how you're going to get rich and you should go start a business?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that play into that. Like you said, I mean, your lifestyle. So I think unless you're able to really, from your current job, and you're young enough, put away 150, 200 grand a year, it's going to be very hard to create a decent lifestyle for yourself. I mean, because think about it, I'm out here in California where I mean, I don't know. You're not doing much unless you're making $400,000, $500,000 a year. And most people at a job are not there. And then you
Right.
think about the continuation of that lifestyle. What do you need in terms? This is the thing I always tell people, and we tell athletes up front is how they prevent them from bankruptcy. Is what you need to figure out is, okay, if your lifestyle is 400 or 500 grand today, what is the lump sum you need to continue that when you can't work? And that's about 10 million bucks.
Right.
So you need $10 million to continue that. How are you going to save $10 million unless you're putting away 100 and something thousand a year? You're not going to.
Yeah. You know, it's funny growing up, you said that 10 million, my dad always told me, like one of the reasons I have the money consciousness that I do is because I grew up with a wealth manager for a dad. And he would always tell me, he said, Jeffrey, he's like, you know, in the world we live in today, and this is when I was a kid, so this was 30 years ago, he goes, the magic number is 10 million. If you don't have $10 million, you have to have some amount of fear for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, so my mom passed, obviously that's not what's funny. My mom passed away, but my mom passed away last year. And I've been going up to see my dad a whole lot more lately, just because he's alone. And
sure.
So we've had these really great talks. And I remember last time I was up there, or maybe 2 times ago, he was driving me to the airport, and I said, Dad, I'm curious. I remember when I was a kid, you told me that it was 10 million or bust, basically. Like, if you don't have $10 million, you're always going to be worried about what if your kid gets sick, or what if somebody has a drug problem, or what if, you know, it was always about your kid, which was me, which is funny. He's like, what if your kid rear ends somebody and you get sued? And like, you know, I even remember, who was it? Peter Thiel saying, when Hulk Hogan was trying to sue Gawker, and Peter Thiel ended up paying for, I don't know if you know that story, paying for his legal defense. He said, a single digit millionaire in this country cannot afford competent representation in the federal court system.
True. Yeah.
Basically, if you have less than $10 million, you can't even effectively sue somebody.
Right.
Like that. That's what he was saying. And so my dad was kind of saying the same thing when I was a kid, but I asked him, I'm like, can you update the number for me? I'm like, you know, that was 30 years ago. What do you think the number is now today? And he said, honestly, it might be 50.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I was going to say it's probably about the number that you need to have. I mean, it's funny, like, you know, I heard you say you're going to update the brand of your show. When you talk about being a millionaire anymore, you know, look, luckily, I mean, I'm very fortunate. I paid over $1 million in taxes last year.
Yeah.
So it's just like being a millionaire. I'd be dead scared if I only had $1 million net worth. I mean, it doesn't last much.
I'll tell you this. So I have a book. So when I started this show about 1.5 years ago, it was part of a strategy. I did the podcast. You know, there's no money in podcasting. And it's actually a hard way to grow a brand too. I did it because I wanted to build the network of folks like yourself, right? And it was part of a strategy that said, okay, I'm going to write a book. And when the book comes out, I want to have a network of people that I've connected with authentically that I could send a copy of my book to and see if they'd be interested in promoting it, right? So it was all this long form book marketing strategy. And it's evolved, but I say this because originally it was a podcast and a book called Millionaire Secrets. And I've basically veered away from that strategically because of exactly what you just said. I think the term millionaire is pretty used and abused, but also $1 million is, I mean, $1 million is like the new 100 grand, right? And I have a chapter. So this is interesting. But the book's basically done, and we gave the manuscript to a beta group to read it and give feedback. And there was one chapter in the book that like really pissed people off, and it was called 10 million is the new million. And you would have thought that I had said, hate on all Asians and Black lives don't matter. People were that pissed that I suggested that having $10 million now is the equivalent of having $1 million before, meaning it's the baseline definition of sufficient wealth in this world to be comfortable, like what $1 million was 20, 30 years ago. And people were pissed.
I mean, but you're right though, right? And just a lot of people, it's very simple. You and I know it, but even if you just use kind of a 4% rule, right? And you've got $1 million, what does that mean in income when you retire? 40 grand. Well, most people that saved $1 million weren't making 40 grand a year. So back to that point, well, at 10 million, that's about 400,000. And that's kind of what you need to live an upper middle class life today in the United States. So that's pretty spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's just interesting to me how hard these conversations are to have with most people. And yet that willful ignorance, that resistance to these types of conversations, you know, the entrepreneur, you hear something and you don't, you know, our inclination is not to say yes or no. The question we're good at asking is, okay, how?
Right. Exactly.
Right. Whereas people hear these ideas of like, oh, listen, if you're not, I mean, think about what you said earlier and how that lands to the average person. If you're not saving, not like parking for a rainy day, 150 to 200 grand a year, you're not even on track to be able to retire at any reasonable level of comfort.
Yeah.
That would irritate a lot of people to hear you say that, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, but it's the truth, right? I mean, I could tell you I do pretty well, but not nearly as good as some of my friends do. And I make quite a bit of money, right? And I still don't have the financial freedom just to say F off to everybody, right? So
yeah.
There's still things I do that I don't necessarily want to do every morning because I'm not at that point yet. Because my number is bigger than 50 million and I'm not there. So I'm still working.
Yeah, I have a shirt that says "Billionaire in the Making," and I wore it. When was that? 2 days. And it's merch for my company, right? It's like I didn't just create the shirt. It's like we have it as a saying. And I wore it to the gym, and then I was getting a smoothie the other day with my wife after the gym, wearing the shirt. I wasn't even thinking about it, and some guy was just looking at it, just like seething, like, how dare you put money front and center in the conversation? Is basically like I don't want money in my space, you know. People just get irritated about it, but the problem is, you know, the entrepreneur, we go, okay, like you tell me that, you say, hey, you got to have $50 million, and immediately I go, okay, you know, first of all, does this guy know what he's talking about? Well, let me look him up. Yeah, he seems pretty credible. Okay, I guess I need to figure out how to make $50 million. You know, fortunately, I'm 42 and I got some time. But most people, they just reject it. Yeah. And then what are they left with?
I mean, your mind, and I'm preaching to the choir, is your most limiting factor, right? And I remember, you know, it's funny, when I was a young broker, you know, I tell this to other brokers, is like, you know, my first thing was, okay, make 100 grand. Okay, I made 100 grand. The next thing is make 150. And it was just funny. It's like when I focused on making a specific number, I'd come within $1 or $2 of that every single year. So that focus, which a lot of people tell you have a goal and drive towards that goal of that specific number, it's just like my mind put me in a position to have the limiting activity to just make that amount. But when I changed it and I said, well, shit, let me forget about how much I make and just think of the process and get up every day, working as hard as I can, as smart as I can, leveraging what I'm doing and not thinking about that number, that's really when it started to grow. And every single year, my goal is just make as much money as humanly possible. Don't worry about the number. And what you find out when you work that way, you're not necessarily working any harder. It's just the activities that you think of are differently. And so one thing I'll say last about that in my business, because you know the business, is there's this like glass ceiling on wealth management firms where people get to 100 million in assets under management and it's extremely hard for them to grow, right? And because what it is to go from 0 to 100, you could just do a lot more of the same shit, right? It's a lot more of the same activity, doing more of the same things. But when you go from 100 million to $1 billion, it's thinking completely differently. It's how do I engage other people? How do I empower other people? How do I step away? How do I think on scale to be able to grow this in a very, very different way? How do I make investments that I wasn't willing to make? Because a lot of times when you think about that, Jeff, $100 million firm, these people at 1% are making themselves $600,000-$700,000 a year. So they're pretty comfortable. They don't want to take any risks. They don't want to invest in other people. They don't want to invest in any technology. So they get stuck there. When you start thinking differently, right, and you start taking more risks, that's really when you start to expand. And that's just kind of a metaphor for your own mind, is what got you to where you're at today. You're not going to get to where you want to go by just incrementally doing more of the same shit. It's big, bold, differentiated action that's going to get you to that next level.
It's funny. It's like you've been on the calls lately with me and my partner. We've been talking about this at length, and it seems like every business every industry or every business category kind of has like a different ceiling, whatever that number is. Like I watched a video the other day from a guy I really like. His name's Alex Hormozy. He's got a YouTube channel, you know, Alex. Yeah. And he was talking about that for him, he kind of pegged that number around 30 million in revenue growing you know, he comes out of the fitness industry. You know, I come out of the digital marketing space and info products. And, you know, for me and my partner, we were talking, it's kind of been in the 50 to 60 million annual revenue range. Where it's just like, damn it, working harder doesn't produce a better result. No. And so we've spent the last it's basically been this year. I mean, we've hired 100, almost 100, between 80 and 90 people this year.
Oh, congrats.
In 2021.
That's great.
And it's all, it's, you know, first we built we concepted our executive team, and we, you know, it takes a long time to hire those key people, but we've now built the executive team, and it's kind of that upper middle management layer that creates the operation, you know, first of all, the processes and the project management and the workflows and the operations and the SOPs to eventually get us to where we don't have to be in the business. But my point is to replace 2 people, me and my partner, we've basically had to hire 80 people.
True.
And that's not putting ourselves on a pedestal. That's just the, you know, call it the founder's intellectual capital, the assumed knowledge, we just know how to do stuff. But to turn it all into duplicatable, predictable processes that you can sub people in and out of, you just have to start thinking a completely different way. I took an 80% pay cut in the last 3 months. I stopped paying myself distributions because I go, no, I need the war chest to build the machine if I'm ever going to break through, you know, to 100 million, 200 million and beyond. And I'm glad we're talking about this, because here's the thing, you know, the Navy SEALs talk about start training now for the firefight that you're going to find yourself in someday, because when you find yourself in the firefight, it's too late to get ready. By the time you need to be ready, it's too late to get ready. Right. So I think entrepreneurs have to start disciplining themselves early to do big, bold, daring things that cut against the grain of their comfort, or else they will reach a ceiling and they won't be willing to do what it takes to break through it.
Well, no, and you hit on it. And that's what I was referring to when I talked about that $100 million advisor. Is I did the same exact thing for myself in 2016. I took a 70% pay cut to hire more people, invest in bigger technology. Look, I use Salesforce as a CRM, and I put 300 grand to customize a version of Salesforce into it. When you're an entrepreneur, you know, that comes out of your own pocket. That's just money that you're not taking home to do that. Right. But that 300 grand and those people that I hired, that's what allowed me, and we're going at 20, 25% to grow at over 120% 3 years in a row. That's what got us on the radar of other firms, right? Was taking that. And I was able to sell my business for several millions of dollars because of the fact we had the right people and processes in place to where if I stepped away, we had enterprise value. The business wasn't worthless. We created a system through Salesforce, which was the biggest CRM out there, that a company from Canada was able to come in, take over, and scale to be almost a $300 billion firm now by using it. We're the first acquisition in the US of now 27, right? So by making those investment decisions and thinking way bigger, I didn't need that system. I didn't need some of those people, but thinking like a multi-billion dollar firm and taking the actions of what would that look like, that's how I was able to finally get rewarded. But it was about 15 years where it took me that I needed to realize that I just couldn't work harder. I had to think differently.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I'm going through it right now. So in fact, I actually, on not the screen I'm looking at, but on this screen over here, I, you know, more than one monitor, I have my screensaver says 80% pay cut. How's that feel, Jeff? Get to work.
Exactly.
And I know the work is, like you said, it's building systems. It's obsessing over processes. It's getting out of the weeds and optimizing the machine. And it's scary. It's obsessive. You have to be obsessed, and you have to talk about this.
Yeah.
How did you manage the fear because I look at people's lifetimes, I talk to a lot of people, and I work with our coaches and our advisors who talk to a lot of people that are, what we really do is we advise people, and we have educational programs to help people become entrepreneurs or grow as entrepreneurs. So we do a lot. I mean, frankly, a lot of what we do is almost like therapy. People are like, well, here's where I'm at in life. What should I do? And what I see is in every life, there are critical junctures where how somebody handles fear completely determines their entire course of their life.
Yeah.
And some people naturally, I think, seem to do better at taking action in spite of fear than others. You were 26 years old. You probably had a lot of voices in your ear, especially growing up poor, people saying you're nuts to walk away from $140,000 a year job to go live off 25 grand. How did you handle the fear?
I just really believed in myself, right? I'm one of those that, like, just a real believer in that, obviously there are people that are, mentally disadvantaged in our world and all those things, but 95% of the population has the ability to do anything they set their minds to do, right? And I never really, but I grew up in a situation where, again, if I could spend an hour and a half telling you, you would say, well, how are you even alive today? Or some of the stuff. I grew up in LA during that time, but I just always knew that when I looked at the time in LA, one of the things was I wanted to own a home in Newport Beach, and it was a dream. And I remember my dad saying, dude, that's not for you. We're not going to ever have anything like that. But I always believed I would. I wanted to own a Ferrari. And obviously all these things I've been able to do in life, because I just believed in myself. And I knew if I worked hard enough and I created an expertise, in which I did, and I spent the time, and I could believe in myself, that I would make the wealth maximizing decisions. And what you're doing, Jeff, really, when we talk about how do you build wealth, it's you have to believe in yourself, because you're not taking that 80% pay cut and investing in Tesla. You're taking that 80% pay cut and ultimately investing in yourself and your belief that 80% pay cut reinvested back in that business is the wealth maximizing decision that's going to get you closer to your goals. And that's exactly what we're talking about. But you have to do two things. Number one, you have to believe in yourself. And that comes from expertise, education, experience, and all those things, really hard work. But secondarily, you then need mentors, you need education, you need to figure out, how do I take that expertise if you don't have that knowledge and leverage and scale that? So what you're doing for entrepreneurs out there, what we're trying to do, that's really what people need. And I could tell you, somebody who has 4 college degrees, that is not taught in the traditional education system today. So you need to find people like yourselves that are out there doing it and showing people how to do that. And when you can put those things together, that's what puts you on the path to success.
So, amen. Thanks for reinforcing. Completely agree with you. Tell me about your Wealth Academy. Can you talk a little more about what you do for people in there? Like how's the process work?
Yeah, so we have, we run it through Lightspeed. A good friend of mine, Brad Lee, who I think you did his show before. We run it through Lightspeed. We do interactive trading on personal finance, showing you how to do your own financial planning, set up your own portfolio. And we also have one on entrepreneurism. I do live Zooms every single week, which a lot of people tell me I'm crazy. But one thing I tell people is, I don't teach a model, I teach frameworks. And those frameworks are able to give you the education and ability to be able to adapt and pivot in an ongoing changing environment. So whether it's being an entrepreneur and how you pivot your business during COVID, or if it's in a stock market that maybe is overvalued, real estate market, what are the live weekly decisions that you need to be able to make to be able to manage that successfully? That's what we teach. And most exciting, I think, what's come out of that, Jeff, is it's given me an opportunity. Like I said, most of my people are millennials trying to start a business, 25 to 35. A lot of them never went to college. And they were never have been the people that prior to me selling my business, I would have ever had an opportunity to engage with. And what it's really created is I've realized that the average person needs good guidance and wealth management more than anyone else out there, because these people are getting screwed. So what I'm actually in the process of doing right now, we're launching a new firm called Real Talk Capital, where we're going to have CFAs and CFPs delivering through technology on scale the same solution we delivered to multi-million dollars for people at a flat subscription fee, no management fees, no asset management fees, with a $500 investment that'll be launching by January. What the goal is to give access to high quality advice to everybody But also now that I've sold my business a little bit self-serving, I think the traditional model of wealth management is broken. It's way too costly. It's way too prohibitive. It's about preservation versus growth. And, you know, by having a flat subscription fee, people pay 50 to 100 and something a month, whether they have $1,000 or $10 million with us, people are going to realize that there's a bet on model. They're paying way too much. And the goal is to put a lot of wealth managers out of business over the next few years.
Wow, that sounds really, really interesting. Yeah, again, that game, the wealth management game, I guess this is maybe we'll circle back to something I started to talk about earlier around rates of return. I remember a guy doing a presentation, and he was a guy that was, you know, a big early proponent of the infinite banking concept. He uses whole life policies to create, you know, these essentially self-banking lines of credit for which I have, you know, I use that strategy a lot and I love it. And he was showing us, he was like, listen, you know, these policies, you know, they have these historic, you know, 120-year track records of paying like a 5% dividend, right? Yeah. But let's look at, and he did this analysis of, okay, here's what 5% every year for 30 years looks like. Then he showed me, okay, and here's a wealth manager who claims to do 10% a year, but I was up 12%, I was down 7%, I was up 14%, I was down 2%. And it's like this, you know, seismograph, right? You know, shape. And at the end of, so you have one guy that averaged like 10 or, you know, let's say 8 or 10%. And then you have the policy that averaged 5%, but it never missed. Mm-hmm. And at the end of 20 or 30 years, the policy curve had more money in it. Right. There's like ways that you can tell, you know, you can have two advisors who over the last 10 years have each averaged 8%, but you could have given one $100 and the other $100 and have a completely different amount of money. Yeah. It's simple average versus geometric average. So there's some people that play games with some of those things out there in terms of what the actual annual compounded rate of return was. And that was actually funny you say that. It's one of the things that I showed Levi at the beginning of our presentation. The only thing I showed him was more about that consistency versus the average return that appears higher, but has huge fluctuations over that. But, you know, it's just, it's, you know, besides that, it's just the traditional system is built on something you probably heard called modern portfolio theory, which was a 1953 Nobel Prize winning theory by a guy named Harry Markowitz. That strategy hasn't worked for like 3 or 4 decades, yet because of the fact that the SEC is kind of accepted that as long as you put your clients into this model and you're somewhere within 1 or 2% of what the S&P does, that's if the S&P does 22% on the upside, or like in 08, 09, if it loses 51, 52%, you're okay. And most people are okay with that. And so a lot of wealth managers are not going to go away from that. And so when you hear like most mutual funds underperform the S&P, well, that's because they look just like the S&P. And to create wealth in the equity markets, you have to look completely different. Most of my investments are in about 12 to 15 stocks, or the vast majority of my investments are in private equity companies, smaller companies that aren't even public. They go public for liquidity events today, not to raise capital. So people just need to think a lot differently these days if they're trying to get better than, you know, average returns when they're investing. Yeah, and to kind of put a bow on it, average returns will not make you wealthy. No. Not even last 20 years, the S&P has done like 7 point something percent. Yeah, and people think that's awesome because their savings account at their bank averages 0.6%. Right. They go, oh, 7%, that's amazing. Well, first of all, depending on which metric of inflation you look at, you know, inflation can be anywhere from 3 to 6%. Yeah. So there goes at least half of your 7%. And anyway, we don't have to beat the horse to death. It's already dead. But man, this has been a great conversation. Like I said, I have so much history with wealth management industry. It's great chatting with you. I know we're out of time. I want to make sure the audience knows how to get more of Rob Luna, whether you're on social, talk about your Wealth Academy. Where would you like to send people? Yeah, sure. I mean, you can follow me on Instagram at @LunaRob. I've got a YouTube channel that I started up this year, which is YouTube.com/LunaRob. Those are probably the 2 best places. I do a weekly show called Wealth Talk
that I put out there, 10 to 15 minutes, free advice, actionable strategies that if you guys want to check that out on YouTube or follow me on Instagram.
Cool. And where can they go to learn more about your Wealth Academy?
Just go to robluna.com.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
You've got money, which is a tool, but you refuse to use it in case you lose it. But what you don't understand, folks, is money is a tool. And if you don't use it, you lose it. Nobody saved their way to wealth.